Today, we're diving into a landmark Canadian court case that gets right to the heart of your rights when dealing with the police. It's called R.v. Suberu, and you're about to see how a few simple words can spark a massive constitutional debate that, honestly, affects every single one of us.
So just picture this for a second. You're walking out of a store, you're heading to your car, totally minding your own business. And then a police officer walks up to you, they make eye contact, and they say, "Wait a minute, I need to talk to you before you go anywhere." I mean, your heart probably just leaped into your throat, right? You're immediately thinking, what's going on? Am I in trouble? Can I just leave? And that leads us to the absolute core of this whole thing.
In that split second, were you just detained? It sounds like such a simple question, doesn't it? But the answer is everything, because it determines the exact moment one of your most important rights under the Charter kicks in, your right to a lawyer.
So to really understand how the courts figured this out, we have to go back to the real-life encounter that brought this whole question to the Supreme Court. We need to talk about the story of Suberu.
So here's what went down. It was June 13th, 2003. Police get a call about a stolen credit card being used at a liquor store. As things are unfolding, Mr. Suberu tries to leave. He walks right past Constable Roughly and says, "He did this, not me, so I guess I can go." But the constable follows him to his van and says those words that changed everything. "Wait a minute." After a few questions, Mr. Suberu was arrested. And that one single command, "Wait a minute," that became the entire legal flashpoint.
Well, right away, Mr. Suberu's lawyers argued that his charter rights were violated. Their whole argument was that his detention didn't start when the handcuffs came out. No, it started the very second the officer told him to wait. This whole situation forced the Supreme Court of Canada to take a really close look at the Charter itself. And the entire legal fight really came down to the specific wording in Section 10B of our Charter. It says you have the right to a lawyer upon arrest or detention. Notice that "or." It's super important. And it says that right has to be given without delay. The whole case literally hung on what those two little phrases actually mean out there in the real world. So this broke the whole problem down into two very clear questions for the court. First, what is the actual legal line for a detention? When does a casual chat with a police officer cross over into something more? And second, if you are detained, how fast is without delay? A minute? 5 minutes? Instantly?
Let's tackle that first question, because honestly, it's the big one. The Supreme Court knew it needed to set out a clear, workable definition of detention that could be used in all sorts of situations, just like Mr. Suberu's.
And this is what they came up with. This is the official definition. A detention isn't just a formal arrest. It's any suspension of an individual's liberty through a significant physical or psychological restraint. And let's just pause on that last part, because it's absolutely crucial. Psychological restraint.
Right. This is the whole point. You do not need to be physically touched or in handcuffs or in the back of a squad car to be legally detained. If you're under what the law calls a psychological restraint, which basically means a reasonable person in your shoes would think they have no choice but to do what the officer says, that can be a detention.
So how does the judge figure that out? Well, they use this three-part test. They look at the big picture. First, were the police just asking general questions, or were they zeroing in on you specifically? Second, what was the officer's conduct like? What words did they use? Was their tone demanding? And finally, they'll even consider your own situation. All of these things help a judge decide, from an objective standpoint, if a reasonable person would have felt they were actually free to just walk away.
So, with this new legal framework in hand, how did the Supreme Court apply it to what happened to Mr. Suberu? This is where it gets really fascinating, because, believe it or not, the judges themselves were split on the answer. The majority of the judges, they landed on the side of this being just preliminary investigative questioning. They argued that a reasonable person would have felt they still had a choice to cooperate or not. But the dissenting judges had a really powerful argument on the other side. They said, look, the command "wait a minute" is an order, not a suggestion. A reasonable person would not feel free to leave. And here's the real kicker. The constable himself admitted that if Mr. Suberu had tried to drive off, he would have chased him, which kind of tells you there wasn't really a choice at all, was there? Now, on that second big question, what without delay really means, the court was completely united. They were crystal clear. They ruled it without delay has to be interpreted as immediately. The second a detention is legally established, whether it's physical or psychological, police have an immediate duty to tell you about your right to a lawyer. There's no wiggle room for just a few quick questions first.
So, in the end, because the majority of judges decided that that initial interaction was not a detention, they concluded that Mr. Suberu's rights only kicked in at the moment of his formal arrest. And since he was properly informed of his rights at that point, his appeal was dismissed.
So what's the big takeaway for you in all of this? This case is incredibly important because it tries to draw a very tricky line in the sand. On one side, it gives police the room they need to do their jobs and ask initial questions. But on the other side, it defines that exact moment when the line gets crossed and your incredibly powerful charter rights are supposed to kick in.
So let's just boil it all down. The key thing to remember is this really delicate balance. Police are allowed to ask you preliminary questions, but the instant a reasonable person in your shoes would feel like they don't have a choice, that they have to comply, a legal detention has begun. And at that exact moment, your right to speak to a lawyer is immediate. It just goes to show you how incredibly fine that line can be between a casual chat and a serious legal situation.
And that really brings us to our final thought. This case, RV Suberu, it doesn't just lay down the law for judges. It gives all of us a framework to better understand our own interactions. It helps clarify that fuzzy boundary between cooperation and compulsion. So the question to leave you with is this. Now that you know where that line is, what, if anything, does that change for you?